It seems like we're all here. It seems like we're all in the same place. Excellent. Grand. You know, remember the old days when you just sharpen a pencil and do a drawing? Well, no. Now you have to involve large numbers of people, huge amounts of technology, and, you know, we live in complicated times. That's all I can say. So I hope you've had a chance to do some drawing this week since last we met. I've had a certain amount of time. I've done a couple of drawings. There's been a few things that I've been preoccupied with, but now I feel like I'm ready to roll. So let's begin. I'm thinking that a lot of us are thinking about the People Drawing People class at Sketchbook School, and so I thought that I would just do some homework from that. Now, not everybody's in that class, understandable, so I thought that I would share what I was going to draw from, which is I'm going to draw just a person, so a full body of a person, and try and kind of get it on the page with a minimum of kind of hassle around proportion and, you know, actually the composition. That's so often the problem when you do a drawing of a person or a drawing of a full body is you start drawing the head and then suddenly you realize you've run out of paper because you're down to the knees. So there are a bunch of different strategies that we've been exploring in People Drawing People. And I'm just going to assume for now that some of you are in the class and will understand what I'm talking about, and some of you are not and won't, and so I'll fill you in. And let me show you first of all what image I want to use. I'm not wild about the fact that I'm going to be drawing from a photo. I'm actually going to be drawing from a video. So there's a slight bit of movement in what I'm drawing, and that is one of the model videos that we have in this class. So it's a model, his name is actually Egypt, and he is sitting on a chair. And Felix Scheinberger drew him in our class, and he used an interesting technique that I want to explore as well with you. And this is a technique that really we can use for doing any type of drawing. And it allows you to sort of do a couple of different drafts of your drawing in the process. So unlike, say, drawing with a pencil and then erasing a lot, this allows you to put down your first thoughts, your first impressions, and then come back and kind of think about them more deeply and do a second draft of it. But the initial drawing is there, as is the second one. So some of you may remember that I did a similar technique a couple of years ago when we launched a class called Seeing, and in that I called it Fast and Slow. And the way Fast and Slow works is you do a draft of your drawing in watercolor in a minute, and then you spend 10 minutes doing a slower, more thoughtful drawing with a pen. You may remember I did the example of a bicycle, so kind of a complicated thing. Wham, you do, here's your first impression, and then you go back in and do it again. And it's a technique that I've tried with a lot of kids in schools. When I've done residencies, artisan residencies in schools, it's a really fun way to kind of get you over the intimidation of having to draw this really complex thing, a bicycle, you know, that has all these different bits, and that we kind of think we know what it looks like, but we don't really know when we look at it. And so, and with a bicycle, it's possible to spend hours drawing it, but it's also possible to spend seconds drawing it. So we're going to kind of try that, yeah, Fast and Slow. Some of you remember it, Karen does, and that's great. So we are going to take a stab at that. So first of all, let me show you our model. Well, actually, I'm going to this is my iPad. That's not what I intended to show you. So let me show you instead our model. Here he is, Egypt. A handsome and exotic man, and he's basically sitting in a chair looking at us, and what we're going to do is we're going to try and to capture his posture, but also to capture his proportions. Like, how do we make sure that we get his head the right size relative to his body, and how do we get the sense that he's sitting in a chair and that his balance his weight is balanced and all that sort of thing. So this technique will allow us to kind of combine both of those things. What I like about it is I think that there are interesting things that happen when you do a drawing quickly. There's energy to your line. And Felix Scheinberger, who's the teacher who worked with this particular, the artist who worked with this particular model, he's really great at putting a lot of kind of raw energy into his drawings, so they really come alive. But we also want to be able to take the time to make sure we've studied it and that we're getting the details, so that we go beyond our first impression, we maintain the energy of the first impression, and then kind of more thoughtfulness of a considered drawing, of kind of a deeper look. And that is kind of the opportunity here, is to do this twice. Let's look back at him again, because he's more interesting looking than I am. And you know, he's wearing an interesting jacket. Egypt is he was just a fascinating guy. He's actually on a TV show now, which is called, I think it's called We Live in Shadows. It's about vampires, and you know, he's there in the he had just been cast in this show, so he appeared there simultaneously. So anyway, enough about him. Let's talk about drawing, and let me bring up my other camera, which is this camera, because I'm going to draw on the iPad today. I hope that's okay with you. If I can just figure this bit out. No, I'm not going to split the screen. I am going to... Anyway, sorry, this is annoying. So I want to use the iPad today because I like drawing on the iPad. You know, I'm not going to apologize for that. But I think everything that I'm going to do has absolutely nothing to do with the iPad. It is, it is just a tool. This is another way of drawing. And what I like about the iPad with this particular technique is that you can do a couple of different layers, and that's what I plan to do. So first, let me make sure that I can actually see the image of Egypt. So give me 1 second to pull up his picture. You know, obviously the most interesting thing about him is that hair, right? I mean, that hair is fantastic. So we want to make sure that we capture that. So, okay, so here he is. I am now looking at him, and you may or may not be able to see him. Let me see if there's some way I can introduce his image while you see my drawing. Here we go. All right, good. So there's Egypt. I'm just going to make him sort of small, put him over here, and then you can see what I'm drawing as well as I can. Okay, so move this around. Now, you'd think I'd be better prepared, but I'm not. So, okay. So I'm going to begin by using, I'm using a pen. There's so many infinite numbers of pens that you have with the iPad, but I'm planning to use this thing called, it's a bleeding edge pen. In other words, it's a pen that you see, it sort of looks organic, and, you know, what Felix does is he uses an actual water brush, you know, with watercolor. So I could do that, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to use this pen, I'm going to use it to just sort of block in the basic shapes I'm seeing. Like this is his head, and this is sort of roughly his afro. And so I'm giving myself kind of 2 minutes to do this. Not even 2 minutes, probably. We'll see how it goes. But I'm trying to sort of work as quickly as I can and just kind of create that first impression that I have of him. And my main concern really is, like, can I get an overall sense of his shape so that I see whether or not he fits into the page. And that's going not terribly well, because I'm concerned, as you can see, I have lost a little bit of him at the bottom here. So again, one of the wonders of the iPad, I can just move him up a bit. So you can't necessarily do that with other stuff, but so this is sort of, I think, his proportion. Now I'm going to measure it a bit. Yeah, I think that is pretty good. Sorry. I just want to give you a sense. There I am. Okay. So now you can see all three of us on the one page. So good. So yeah, so there he is. He's of course sitting on a chair, which we can only see part of, and I'm measuring him. So I'm measuring, and it seems to me, with a quick measurement, that I kind of have it right, because I think I made his body perhaps a little tall, but generally I think that's about right. So that was, how long did I spend on doing that? Not too long. I have a feeling his legs are not long enough. But we'll work that out, because that's going to be the second draft, and the second draft is going to allow me a chance to kind of think about this a bit more and take my time. So let's see where we go with that. So I'm going to start with his head, and he has a very rectangular face, really. His ears are down here, sort of. His other ear is here. His head and his neck kind of slope right into each other. And there we go. And now his collar of his jacket comes down here. Shoulders. Sorry if I don't talk a huge amount while I'm doing this. It's hard to concentrate and jabber simultaneously. Yeah, I'm already seeing that I did almost certainly make a mistake where I put his knees. I think his knees are really more up here. But that's part of the process of learning and of taking your time, because when you take your time, you see more. But you know what? Maybe I'll just go with these weird proportions. I mean, I think that's one of the things that is interesting that we've been talking about already in People Drawing People, and that it's something certainly that I've thought about quite a lot, which is sometimes you make a mistake and you have to learn to live with it. So I'm going to live with this mistake. There's a finger. It's interesting to put in certain landmarks that you see in his body. Yes, I'm sorry, there's some question about what I'm doing. I'm using Procreate, I'm using a pencil, I'm using an iPad. So, yes, not that it really matters, honestly. I mean, I could have been doing this with just about anything and done as inaccurate a drawing as I'm doing, but there we go, there's another finger. So, I see, that's what the problem is. I put the bottom of his butt in probably the wrong place. So, I'm just trying to put in landmarks of his body that I see. So, what are the kind of main things that stand out and that allow me to know how deeply into this drawing I am, like where do things intersect, and what are the angles that I'm seeing. So I'm seeing already that his shoes are actually bigger than I thought, I think. This crossbar is around ankle height. This one is around the base of his shoes. And so I feel like I have all the parts more or less in the right places now. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest challenges, of course, is like, how do you get the person on the page and make them feel like they have the right proportion and that you don't run out of space. Okay, Wolfgang, it is Procreate, and yes, I'm using a textured screen protector, but let's not worry about that now. Let's just focus on the drawing, on the process. Anyway. I'm sorry, I feel like I've distracted everybody with the fact of an iPad, but I'm happy to talk about the iPad. I really like it, and I think it's a cool tool. Right now I'm not using it to its main advantage, I'll be honest, because I'm really using it just like a sketchbook. I'm just using it like a piece of paper, but I really like using a lot of other features of Procreate, which allow you to use layers, to use colors in all sorts of amazing ways that you really can't do with traditional media at all. It's the most fantastic tool I've ever used, and you know, it's certainly tempting to get lost in all of the art supplies that it comes with, because it has an infinite number of options when it comes to colors and brushes and all that stuff, you know. But over time I've kind of figured out what are the things that I like the best, that I use the most, and I kind of stick to them. It's also tempting to go back and erase. Let me just erase his jawline here a bit, you know, which is certainly something I don't really do in my sketchbook that much, but anyway. This pen is very coarse, and the lines are kind of wobbly, which is nice. It has a sort of an organic feel to it, but it's not a super accurate instrument, which is fine with me. I feel like that's one of the problems with a lot of digital art, is that it is super polished and refined, and I personally like stuff that is more random in some ways. So yeah, I'm starting to feel a little insecure about some of my lines, but let's not be, for the sake of progressing. All right, so his hair is really fun, and you know, you can certainly go on and on and on with it, and I'm really tempted to do that because there's so many little details to it, and it's so wild. All right, let's have some fun and add some color, why not? And I'm going to use this, I'm going to use a brush that sort of mimics gouache. So you see how it sort of has a texture to it, which is quite nice. I love gouache and that kind of dry, rough feeling that it gives you. So now I'm going to erase some of that because it's a bit too thick there. But I can erase it with a gouache brush and then go back in and do some more. So anyway, for those of you not interested in the iPad, I hope you're still following with me. Because really the most important thing to me in this process was to do this kind of two-take look at the model, you know, to to just look at him twice and see if I could learn more about him as I progressed. And you know, I sort of like the fact that you still see my original drawing underneath there, right? You can still see my struggle. And now I'm going to go back and just continue to add layers and details. So I want to go back to my original brush, which was this thing, and just add some more details. These boots of his are very cool. So, okay. What do you guys think? How is that? Whoops. Let me get rid of our guy. Oh, actually, you know, this could be cool. Let me add him. Let me lose me, and then let's have a look at both of them together. Does he seem reasonably in proportion? That was kind of my main objective, was to make him in proportion. So, actually, you know, let me try something. This could be cool. Watch this. I'm going to insert a photo of him. Oops. Have a look at my pictures for a second. This is my wife. I was trying out my new camera yesterday. So let's try this. If we multiply him, then we can sort of see how accurate I was. Kind of like we do in some of the people drawing people videos. You can sort of see how accurate I was. Pretty good, pretty good. I mean, I think I got all the bits more or less where I wanted them. So there you go. That is the test. What do you guys think? I just want to look at this drawing by itself without the color for a second. Kind of like it better without the color, I have to be honest. But I definitely like it. Oh, you see, that's actually kind of interesting too. So if you take away that original version, it's there, but I think it's kind of cool with it in. There you go. So, quick 10-15 minute sketch. Let me just see if I have got any interesting questions that you guys would like to ask me. So there's a lot of discussion in here about screen protectors, and the screen protector, I think, it's just basically a piece of adhesive plastic that goes on your iPad, and it just makes it feel a little bit more like you're drawing on paper as opposed to drawing on glass. So it's nice that way. It protects it, I guess, which is a smart thing too, because the iPad's a fairly expensive deal. What else do we have that people are interested in? Boy, there's just a lot of discussion about the iPad. I'm working actually on a class about the iPad. So Sam asked if there's any advice we could give on drawing figures. It's a very large question, seeing as we're just offering a 5-week course called People Drawing People, which is all about drawing people. So my first piece of advice was sign up for the class. You can do that at sketchbookschool.com. Failing that, I would say my next piece of advice was draw a lot of people. Draw and draw and draw, and try different strategies for how you can capture their proportions. And that's the main thing that we really discuss in this class is how do you do it? You know, we all had this experience of you buy a book about figure drawing and it gives you these lessons in how to draw using, you know, some sort of stick figurey lines, or drawing an egg and cutting it in half and half and half and again. And I think for most of the artists I know, that advice is not really that useful, and none of us really use it. We draw people a lot of the ways that we draw just about anything. You can draw people just like you draw a car or a building or a bowl of fruit. What's different about drawing people from drawing a bowl of fruit is we know people and what they look like at such an intense level in our brains. Our brains are designed to capture and to recognize features. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I remember once going to a football game, and it was in a big stadium with probably like 10,000 people in it, and a friend of mine was sitting on the other side, and I felt him look at me. So he was like several hundred yards away. He was one of many, 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 many faces, and somehow I knew that it was him and that he was looking at me. That's kind of the predator brain that we have, right? Our ability to recognize features. But I'm sure you've all had this experience where you're walking down the street and you see somebody you haven't seen in many years, and yet you instantly recognize them. So that works to our advantage, but when it comes to drawing people, it can also get in our way, because suddenly we're judging things incredibly harshly. As opposed to a bowl of fruit, we don't have those kind of banana, grape, apple sort of module in our brain that recognizes things so clearly. So we tend to judge our drawings of people much more harshly than drawings of other things. But the skills required are kind of the same, which is to slow down, to observe landmarks, to look at intersections, to look at the shapes of things, to look both at details and at the overall image. And that's what this technique that I just did allows you to do, which is to combine that macro perspective with that first yellow drawing that I did, the macro perspective, like a quick, instant kind of impression, with the specificity and the details that a long, slow drawing would do. Now, normally, if you go to life drawing class, you'll do 1-minute warm-up drawings, and then you might do a 20-minute or 30-minute or even a 2-hour session of drawing the model in real detail and really slowly. I often find that my 1-minute drawings are as accurate as my 2-hour drawings. I mean, it's possible to spend so much time working on drawing a figure where you're like obsessing about, you know, the tiny details of it, and then you step back and you go, whoa, it's like it's completely off. You know, we have to be able to kind of go back and forth between those two parts of our brain. So those would be my piece of advice, Sam. But ultimately, I would say that's a very general question, and so I hope that this is a helpful response. Let me see. Let me see if there's any other interesting questions here. Is Procreate an app? Yes, it is. It's an app that is not very expensive. I think it's maybe $10. It's the most incredible piece of software I've ever used, and they just updated it 2 days ago. It keeps getting better and better. It's very, very good. And I've used lots of different ones, and it is fantastic. All right. Procreate. You see most recently. The second drawing with a fine tip pen really helps with recognizing landmarks and angles. Do you have any tips? Well, I tried to give you a couple of them as I was working, but I think that taking measurements and using landmarks are really essential parts of it. So taking measurements means something as simple as holding up your pen and measuring the thing that you're looking at by closing one eye, and then doing comparisons. So how big is the head? How wide are the shoulders? How long is the torso compared to the length of the shins? All those kinds of measurements, and going back and forth and adjusting things is a way to get things in proportion. And landmarks are basically saying to yourself, okay, let me look at where the ear is parallel to the knee. You know, his thumb that's stuck out, from his clasped hands, where does that line up with the eye? So doing those kind of measurements back and forth. And there's lots and lots of landmarks in a body. And in fact, if you can get to the point where you stop referring to them as thumbs and eyes and noses, and instead just refer to them as like an angle or a lump or a twist or a bent curve. When you take away that part of your brain that insists on labeling things and that thinks it knows what things look like, your drawings become more accurate. You start to draw what you're actually seeing as opposed to what you think you see. And that becomes particularly important when you're drawing something in an unfamiliar position. It's like, for instance, drawing something that's foreshortened. In his case, we're drawing him sitting down, so we don't really see his thighs. We don't really know, where his knees should be in proportion to. So we end up with things that we don't know the names of. We don't know what they're supposed to be, and the best way to cope with that is, again, to eliminate labeling and to just see things for what they are. So I hope that those things are useful. Again, I've written books, I've taught classes. We have a lot of things that will help you to get deeper into all that stuff. All right, continuing to talk about the iPad and text with the iPad. Okay, so lots to talk about the iPad. I'm going to try and do this again next week. I think I'm probably not going to bring the iPad, just because it seems to have been a bit of a distraction when I wanted to talk about drawing, but that's okay. The main thing is to draw as often as you can, and what I would love to be able to do with you is to draw with me. So next time, bring your iPad, bring your pen and pencil and crayons and watercolors, whatever you want to bring, and of course your sketchbook, and let's just draw together. Next week, I think I'm going to pick a subject that we can all draw from. So rather than a photo, maybe we will draw, I don't know, maybe a cup of tea. It's always nice to draw a cup of tea. So maybe we will have some object in mind, or maybe you can bring something of your own to be your model, and then we'll work on drawing that. Okay, good. Well, that was fun. I enjoyed this. What is my name? My name is Danny Gregory. You can find me here in Sketchbook School at any point. So, good. Well, thanks very much for joining me. I'm sorry I haven't been able to answer everybody's questions, but feel free to post comments here that I can look at, or to email me, danny@sketchbookschool.com. And check out sketchbookschool.com. We have lots of classes on drawing, including a class that I teach called How to Draw Without Talent, that deals with a lot of the questions that we've had today, the non-Procreate questions. And also we have a new class that's going on right now called People Drawing People, from which today's subject came. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.